Number 12. Fishing trio's terrifying encounter. Australia's Coral Sea is a beautiful but deadly place. It's home to multiple shark species that are known to attack humans, including bull sharks, mako sharks, and great whites. So it was likely one of the worst places to be when a shrimping boat crewed by 3 fishermen and women capsized in July 1983. The 28-year-old skipper Ray Boundy was with 24-year-old Dennis Patrick Murphy and 21-year-old Linda Ann Horton when their boat encountered rough weather and overturned 60 miles from shore, and as the trio clung to the wreckage, a 15-foot tiger shark approached. They initially tried to avoid antagonizing the creature, hoping it would be enough to avoid an attack, but it wasn't. The shark bit Boundy's leg, so he kicked it and it swam away. But about 10 minutes later, it was back for more. This time, the shark went after Dennis Murphy, who cried out, screaming that the shark had his leg. And just moments later, Boundy noticed that the water around Dennis was starting to turn red. With no medical supplies or other means of coming to his friend's aid, the skipper was helpless to take meaningful action. Dennis advised Boundy to bolt from the scene as he swam away from the debris. He was luring the shark away from his buddy in a bid to save at least one of their lives. Boundy and Linda Horton could hear Dennis's blood-curdling screams as the shark ravaged his body. He eventually went silent, which was when his surviving friends knew he was no longer alive. The shark swam away again, and it stayed away for several hours, but the remaining duo's luck was short-lived. At around 4 a.m., their unwanted visitor returned, and on his third go at the group, the shark targeted Linda, sinking its razor-sharp teeth into her body and shaking her until she went motionless. Boundy later told reporters from Australian news site UPI that he heard Linda utter one cry as the shark clamped its jaws down on her, and that he continued to hold her hand as the apex predator ripped her in half. After spending 36 hours at the mercy of the Coral Sea and its wildlife, Boundy was rescued. As the sole surviving member of his group, it was never lost on him that he had his friends to thank for helping him get through the ordeal. The harrowing experience inspired the 2010 movie The Reef, which is about 5 tourists who are attacked by a shark after their ship sinks in the Coral Sea. Number 11. Russian tourist is eaten alive. In June 2023, 23-year-old Vladimir Popov was swimming at a resort in Hurghada along Egypt's Red Sea coast when he suddenly screamed, "Papa, save me!" In a gruesome encounter that was captured on camera, he was being attacked by a tiger shark. Bystander footage showed the water around Popov turning red as he screamed in agony. While little could be done to help Popov by that point, onlookers captured the shark and bludgeoned it to death. Fishermen later retrieved parts of the young man's body from the water, while other body parts, including Popov's chest, head, and at least one hand, were found inside the shark's stomach. Officials released what was left of Mr. Popov's remains to his father, who planned to cremate them. And rumor has it that there are plans in the works to mummify the shark and put it on display in a museum. While it's not unheard of for tiger sharks to attack humans, this one displayed an unusually high level of aggression. Experts have speculated that the female specimen was pregnant when she viciously tore the victim to pieces. They also believe that she may have been involved in 2 other fatal maulings that happened the previous summer. In July of 2022, a 68-year-old Austrian woman named Elizabeth Sauer and a Romanian woman in her 40s were killed in shark attacks that occurred just hours apart. Footage of the first attack showed Sauer trying to swim away from the shark as it followed her in the water. A bystander along the shoreline threw her a flotation device as the water turned red with blood. Efforts were made to revive the woman, but unfortunately she died from her injuries. Speaking with The Sun following the more recent attack on Vladimir Popov, marine biologist Dmitry Orlov speculated that the shark may have remembered the beach as a place where she previously found easy prey when she was pregnant and couldn't hunt as efficiently as usual. But even this doesn't fully explain the increased number of attacks in the area in recent years, which has baffled experts and kept more and more people out of the water. Number 10. Deadly violence in New Caledonia. Almost any shark attack news story includes a blurb about how these aggressive encounters are extremely rare. And this is true, but even experts have become concerned in recent years as many coastlines around the globe experience a noticeable uptick in shark attacks. One place that's been repeatedly mentioned in reference to its increased shark attacks is the French Pacific territory of New Caledonia. During the first 6 months of 2023, there were 4 reported shark attacks off the New Caledonian coast, 2 of which were fatal. The first deadly encounter happened at Chateau Royal Beach in Noamea, where a 55-year-old Australian tourist named Chris Davis was bitten by a 13-foot-long tiger shark. He was swimming less than 500 feet from the shore when the creature in question inflicted a single bite, severing a major artery and causing the father of 3 to fatally bleed out. The tragedy came on the heels of a spate of non-lethal attacks in the area, prompting officials to close Noamea's beaches until late November 2023. On May 28th, roughly 3 months after David was killed, a shark attacked a 42-year-old spear fisherman off Tuani Island near the town of Powell. According to news reports, the man was fishing roughly 1,640 feet from the shoreline when a family member in a nearby boat noticed the water around him turning red. The relative jumped into the water and pulled the victim onto the boat, but his injuries were severe, and despite the family's hurried attempts to get help, they were unable to save the fisherman, who was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities are unsure of what's causing the spike in shark attacks off New Caledonia, but while they work to figure it out, they're not taking any chances. In addition to the swimming bans off Noamea, officials have introduced a host of strict measures to prevent further tragedies, including a shark culling program. Unfortunately, this is a less than ideal solution to the problem, according to experts, who say that killing a large number of sharks can disrupt the area's marine ecosystem. But in this case, human safety is the priority, and over 200 sharks have already been killed. Number 9. Film crew attacked by sharks. You may have seen or at least heard of the Netflix docu-series Our Planet 2, which is famously narrated by British biologist Sir David Attenborough. But what most people don't know is that while filming the show in 2023, a Netflix camera crew experienced a terrifying ordeal that many would argue is enough to make viewers appreciate what they go through to bring nature into our living rooms. The crew was filming around the Hawaiian island of Laysan when they decided to do an underwater photo shoot to capture footage of tiger sharks lurking in the water. But it wasn't long before 2 sharks started to attack the crew members' inflatable boats, sending the group into a panic and prompting an emergency landing on the shore. During an interview with Radio Times, producer and director Toby Nowlan described how the crew had already been attacked once when they saw a V-shaped wave of water coming straight at them. A tiger shark then leapt out of the water and bit the inflatable boat, leaving huge holes in it and causing it to explode. The predator refused to relent as the terrified crew members tried to escape. Luckily, they were just 328 feet from dry land, and they managed to reach safety, although they barely avoided a worse situation in the process. But the violence wasn't over. After patching up the boat, the crew deployed a rubber dinghy, which was then attacked by fish called giant trevallies, which grow up to 6 feet long and can weigh more than 100 pounds. The unprovoked attack knocked out the dinghy's motor, but it was arguably less intimidating than what the crew had already been through that day. Nowlan told the Radio Times that the tiger sharks that the team encountered were acting unusually hungry and aggressive. He speculated that the animals may have been struggling to find enough of the food, and that perhaps they were attacking anything seemingly edible that crossed their path. Number 8. Retired professor versus apex predator. During a solo swim off Lovers Point in Pacific Grove, California one afternoon in 2022, 62-year-old retired college professor Steve Broomer encountered one of the biggest great white sharks ever recorded. The gargantuan predator wasted no time sinking its teeth into Broomer's body. And by the time anyone nearby noticed what was happening and rushed into the water to help, the creature had nearly devoured its victim like a snack, leaving his stomach, arms, and legs ravaged. Luckily though, a surf instructor and 2 paddleboarders pulled the severely injured swimmer to shore and he was rushed to the hospital. Broomer is lucky to be alive today. He lost nearly 25 pints of blood and probably would have died if any more time had passed before rescue came. Doctors described the victim's bites as some of the worst they'd ever seen, but they predicted that Bruma would fully recover thanks to the quick-thinking onlookers who rushed into action despite any concerns they may have had for their own safety. Police officer Paul Bandy, who helped save Bruma, told local station KSBW that he overheard the victim's cries for help. Bandy could tell that something was very wrong based on the highly distressed tone of Bruma's voice and the way he was slapping around frantically in the water. In a video taken from his hospital bed, the retired professor described how the shark bit him across the thighs and abdomen before it spat him out. He believed that the shark mistook him for a seal and lost interest upon realizing that it had targeted the wrong prey. But luckily, all it took was a good kick to make the shark go away. Bruma spent several weeks in the hospital and was released with a good prognosis for his continued recovery. But the outcome of the situation could have been a lot worse. The shark came within a millimeter of severing a major artery, but luck was on Bruma's side. He also emerged from the ordeal with no major organ or bone damage, and above all, he credited his rescuers with saving his life. A year after the attack, Bruma told KSBW that he doesn't have nightmares over the ordeal, but that he's now constantly aware of the dangers that come with swimming in the ocean. Number 7. Man saves his own leg. As an avid fisherman, 20-year-old Kevin Blanco regularly went spearfishing with his friends off the Florida Keys. The group was at their regular spot one day in May of 2023 when a fish that Kevin speared got caught up in some underwater rocks. Knowing its blood could attract sharks, he attempted to swim 70 feet down to retrieve the fish, but his descent was interrupted by the very thing that Kevin and his friends were trying to avoid: a shark. Kevin would later tell local station WPTV that the shark blindsided him. He also described the experience as feeling like he'd been hit by an F-150. The offending creature bit the young man in the leg twice, but he managed to resurface with help from his friends, who administered first aid and called 911. And thanks to his quick thinking, Kevin managed to save his leg by taking off his weight belt and using it as a tourniquet. It was good practice for the young man, who said he wants to become a doctor, but hopefully he won't get any more real-life experience anytime soon. Emergency responders rushed Kevin to the emergency room, where doctors treated him for severe puncture wounds, and thankfully they predicted that he'd make a full recovery. Just a week earlier, a teenage girl was attacked in shallow waters off Fort Pierce. Then, less than 2 days after the attack on Kevin, a shark bit a 35-year-old man in the foot in nearby Summerland Key. While it's undoubtedly alarming for 3 attacks to happen within such a close time span in one region, predator expert Yanis Papastamashiou told WPTV that it didn't necessarily mean that something unusual was going on. And while attacks are unfortunate, he said that a large number of sharks in the water is indicative of a healthy ocean. Number 6. South African surfer loses limb. In 2015, a 20-year-old college student named Caleb Swainpole was surfing with his 2 brothers off Buffalo Bay in South Africa's Western Cape province when he spotted a great white shark in the water. He alerted his siblings to the predator's presence, and the trio swam towards the shore as fast as possible. But they were unable to reach dry land before the shark clamped its jaws down on Caleb's leg, just 328 feet from the beach. The great white proceeded to pull the young man underwater as he tried to fight it off, with no luck. Caleb later told the Daily Mail that he suddenly felt something disconnect, and in his own words, "There was no pain, I just felt something leave my body." The surfer's leg was gone, but he was at least free from the shark's grasp, and he took the opportunity to continue his rush toward the shore with his brother's help. Unfortunately, though, the great white came back for a second helping of human flesh, and this time it bit Caleb's remaining leg. But by some miracle, he managed to get to a hospital in time to avoid bleeding to death. Doctors managed to save his left leg, but they were left with no other choice than to amputate his mangled right leg above the knee. Losing a leg is more than a minor setback, but Caleb was determined to get back to living his life. He worked extremely hard to regain his mobility and was eventually able to return to college, where he earned his theater and performance degree. The ambitious scholar later said that returning to school gave him something to work toward and kept him motivated during his recovery. In the meantime, he mastered the use of his new prosthetic leg. He not only returned to surfing, but began to do it competitively and represented South Africa in the 2016 World Adaptive Surfing Championships. Caleb's impressive ability to overcome the sudden adversity he faced proved that even in the event of an unexpected setback, he could pursue his goals just like any other ambitious young person. Number 5. First fatal attack of 2023. The world's first fatal shark attack of 2023 came on January 5th when a 53-year-old diver named Manuel Lopez encountered an aggressive great white in the waters off Sonora in western Mexico. According to media reports, when the shark came along and bit his head off, Lopez was gathering a type of mollusk called axe tripe, which are typically found at depths of 36 to 59 feet. Eyewitness Jose Bernal told the news outlet Tracking Sharks that the great white also bit both of Lopez's shoulders while cleanly removing his head from his body. The gruesome attack came on the heels of increased reported shark sightings in the area. Authorities had warned local fishermen and divers about the shark presence, but Lopez was reportedly struggling financially. He saw an opportunity to make good money amid an ongoing shellfish shortage, so he opted to overlook any safety concerns he may have had about the dangers of diving. While the cause of the attack is unclear, it's possible that Lopez's movement may have attracted a nearby shark. Attacks are also known to result from sharks mistaking humans in wetsuits for seals. But in most cases, a shark will take a sample bite from a human and will move on after realizing it's not the type of meal they were after. Unfortunately for Lopez, though, the creature he crossed paths with caused catastrophic damage, whether it was intentional or not. Number 4. Surfing adventure tragedy. On a Saturday afternoon in May 2023, 46-year-old Australian school teacher Simon Bacanello was surfing with some friends near his home in South Australia when he was suddenly attacked by a shark. 22-year-old Jaden Miller, who witnessed a horrific ordeal off the west coast, described seeing Bacanello pulled underwater roughly 1,640 feet from the shoreline. Miller told the Adelaide Advertiser that he saw the missing teacher's surfboard popping in and out of the water, indicating that Bacanello was fighting for his life as the shark continued to yank him beneath the surface. And while he couldn't see Bacanello himself, the shark was visibly thrashing around near the surfboard. An onlooker called the police and a massive search ensued, but not a single sign of Simon was found other than some material from his wetsuit and his surfboard, which had a single bite in the middle of it. Unfortunately, it was enough to conclude that he likely didn't survive the attack. The search continued, but Bacanello's body was never found. He was presumed dead, leaving the tight-knit community and his students in a state of shock and distress as they grieved a beloved educator. The disturbing incident marked Australia's third fatal shark attack of 2023. 3 months earlier, a teenager was mauled to death by a 15-foot great white shark off Sydney, and a few weeks before that, a teen from Perth jumped from her jet ski in the Swan River and was pulled from the water with critical injuries from a suspected shark attack. Sadly, she passed away despite emergency responders' best efforts to save her life. Number 3. Scuba diver loses leg. 73-year-old Heidi Ernst is an experienced scuba diver with more than 500 dives under her belt, but this didn't make her any more immune to a shark attack than the average swimmer. The Iowa native was scuba diving off Taino Beach during a vacation to the Bahamas in 2023 when she felt the troubling sensation of something biting down on her calf. She later recalled seeing the shark's head moving from side to side as it tore into her leg. Miraculously, though, she found the strength to fight the creature off. The attack happened while Heidi was standing on a ladder of a boat, which luckily enabled her to be pulled from the water quickly. And thanks to quick first aid, she survived the attack. After being stabilized at a local hospital, Heidi was airlifted to a hospital in Miami, where doctors discovered that her leg was infected and decided to amputate. According to a crowdfunding campaign seeking donations to help with Heidi's medical bills, she's undergone several surgeries and blood transfusions and faces a lengthy road to recovery. During an interview with ABC News, Heidi said that she didn't see the shark approach her. Out of nowhere, she felt like she'd been hit by a truck, and she described the experience as similar to a scene from a horror movie. But Heidi is determined not to let her newfound setbacks stop her from living life to the fullest, and she's not going to let what happened keep her out of the water. She said that she plans to continue scuba diving and that she's even started researching gear for amputees. Number 2. Close call in the Everglades. In a heart-stopping close call that was captured on camera in June of 2023, a young fisherman named Nick was nearly yanked off his boat in the Florida Everglades as he released a fish into the water. The footage first appeared in a social media post by a man named Michael Russo, who said he was on the boat when the terrifying encounter occurred. In the video, Nick could be seen leaning forward to rinse his hands off after freeing a fish he'd caught. Then, out of nowhere, a large bull shark jumped out of the water and bit his hand. Luckily, Nick's friends sprang into action fast enough to prevent anything worse from happening and pulled him back into the boat. Russo said that there was no blood or fish guts in the water, so in other words, nothing that should have attracted the shark to Nick's hand. The disturbed onlooker described the experience as one of the scariest days he'd ever had on the water, and he said that the attack on Nick was unprovoked. And having seen firsthand what can happen in just a split second, Russo said that the sharks are no joke in the Everglades, and the warnings about keeping your hands out of the water are not an exaggeration. According to Russo's now deleted social media post, Nick's friends rushed him back to the dock, where he was airlifted to the hospital. The extent of his injuries is unclear, but it's at least safe to assume he survived, making him luckier than many people on today's list. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Horror in Paradise. Like most parts of the Caribbean, the Turks and Caicos Islands are famous for their pristine beaches, crystal clear water, and year-round tropical warmth. It's not the type of place someone usually goes with the expectation that things will go terribly wrong. But unfortunately, that's exactly what happened for one American tourist in 2023 when she crossed paths with an angry shark in the waters off Princess Alexandra National Park. The 22-year-old woman from Connecticut was snorkeling at a site called the Boneyard during a private boat trip when the offending specimen took notice of the young woman's leg. While the details of exactly what happened are unclear, an employee at a nearby resort called the police and reported that a shark had bitten a woman's leg off. In a statement, the Big Blue Collective Boat Company said that the victim was extracted from the ocean and dispatched in the ambulance in 15 minutes, saving them from a potentially life-threatening situation. The company credited the boat captain and other employees' calm, quick, and measured response with sparing the woman from a worse outcome. Little else is known about what happened, but various news outlets reported that the victim was a Yale student, that she lost part of her leg, and that she was eventually airlifted to a hospital in Miami. The good news is that she survived. Number 19. Benjamin Green and Nasli Ortiz. One day during the summer of 2022, Benjamin Green and Nasli Ortiz got into a fight with a fellow motorist in Harris County, Texas. They decided to follow the driver, who had his young nephew in the car, until he finally pulled over. Green then allegedly got out of his truck and confronted the man, who tried leaving the scene as Ortiz fired a gun into the back window of his vehicle. Disturbing footage of the interaction shows what looks like Ortiz firing 2 shots before she and Green left the scene. One of the bullets grazed the victim's head, but he luckily survived with minor injuries. The child in his back seat was hit by shattered glass, but was also not seriously injured. The other bullet struck a nearby car dealership. Luckily, nobody there was harmed either. Ortiz was charged with aggravated assault, while Green currently faces an assault charge. At her first court appearance, Ortiz blamed the other driver for starting the altercation and claimed she was afraid for her safety after the victim's car almost hit hers. The case is still ongoing. In a more recent example of road rage that led to gunfire, shots broke out between 2 parties in Denver, Colorado's Goldsmith neighborhood. One unlucky driver got caught between the shooters while their dashcam was rolling. In the video, a dark SUV and a white pickup truck were seen weaving in and out of traffic as the pickup tried to get away from the SUV. After passing through a busy intersection, someone in the SUV fired a few gunshots towards the pickup truck in front of them, causing the driver to swerve into the oncoming lane of traffic as he tried avoiding the shooter. The shots kept coming as the truck continued driving toward oncoming traffic to avoid bullets. Thankfully, the confrontation ended without anyone getting hurt. Shortly after this incident happened in May 2023, police reached out to the public for help identifying the drivers. Investigators were troubled and wanted to learn more about what led up to a gun getting pulled out. They even noted that tipsters could be eligible to receive a cash reward, but nobody seems to be in the mood to cough any information up. The story has gone quiet, and it seems as if the drivers are still unidentified. Road rage can easily turn deadly, and while our first instinct is often to react in an aggressive manner, this usually isn't the smart thing to do. Number 18. The murder of Scott Roberts. In a terrifying act of violence captured by a doorbell camera, 66-year-old Jeffrey Roberts drove from Long Beach, California to his brother Scott's house in North Ogden, Utah before gunning down his sibling in cold blood. Scott and his wife Jody were peacefully eating dinner when Jeffrey randomly showed up at their front door. When Scott answered, Jeffrey simply said, "What's up?" Scott replied, obviously confused by the visit, "What are you doing?" Jeffrey asked if their mother was there, and Scott said she was in Missouri and had been there for over a year. Suddenly, Jeffrey decided to pull a gun from inside his jacket and fired at Scott about 8 times. Before dying from his injuries, Scott yelled out to Jody, telling her to run. She was shot that day but survived her injuries. At least one neighbor called 911 and reported hearing the gunfire. In the call's recording, he was heard saying that there was a man and a van in the Roberts driveway that he didn't recognize. He seemed unsure of whether he heard actual gunshots, but he asked if the police would at least drive by to check the situation out. Responding officers met continued gunfire with an outright refusal to cooperate from Jeffrey when they got to the scene. He then used road flares to light the house on fire. In the doorbell camera's footage, he could be seen coming and going from the house before leaving for a final time, with all the smoke alarms blaring. With no other choice, officers returned fire and killed Jeffrey. Any hope of learning what his motive behind the shooting was died with him. A family friend told ABC7 that family estrangement was a major factor in the tragedy, and that others allegedly pushed Jeffrey to his breaking point. She unfortunately didn't go into detail on what that could have meant, so we can only speculate. Number 17. Harrowing hostage rescues. In October 2021, all hell broke loose in downtown Los Angeles when police responded to reports of a man with a gun. They met a suspect who repeatedly shot at a group of civilians. A teenager was barely grazed by a bullet and was expected to recover, and thankfully nobody else was caught in the crossfire. But the day's chaos was just getting started. The suspect, who was later identified as 45-year-old Rudy Anderson, also tried to carjack a vehicle. The woman behind the wheel managed to lock her doors in time and drive away safely. Anderson then shoved someone off a bike and also tried to steal that, but ultimately ran away with empty hands. When he noticed that the police were catching on to him, he went inside an apartment building. Police followed him inside, where he entered a woman's home and held her hostage at gunpoint. He then barricaded the front door and placed the victim in front of a window, where he continued to hold a gun over her head. As soon as a SWAT team forced their way into the apartment, gunfire rang out. Anderson was fatally shot during the exchange of bullets, and the hostage escaped without any injuries. Harrowing bodycam footage showed the woman crawling away from Anderson as the SWAT team busted into the apartment. The terrifying series of events was also captured by surveillance cameras and witnesses' cell phones. When the story first broke out, the investigation was still ongoing. Anderson's motive for the deadly crime spree remains unclear, but it's probably safe to assume he was mentally unstable and not getting the help he needed for it. In another jarring hostage situation captured on camera back in 2016, an armed thief went into a Jacksonville, Florida credit union building and held everyone inside hostage for multiple hours. His approach to the robbery was very strange. Later identified as Nicholas Humphrey, the man pretended to be blind and had what seemed to be a service dog with him. Out of nowhere, he pulled a gun and ordered everyone to gather into a nearby room. Humphrey seemed noticeably nervous after the police became involved, as if he was just then realizing the gravity of what he was doing. But instead of surrendering and giving up, he continued to impose orders upon his hostages by making them walk in lines and on their knees. He also threatened to kill the hostages if they didn't listen to him. The scary but strange situation got even worse when Humphrey started making demands to negotiators. He asked for several of his family members, though it's not entirely clear why. Jacksonville Sheriff Mike Williams believed that mental health issues may have played a role, which is a fair assessment to make, considering what happened. After all, nobody who robs a bank is 100% sane. At multiple points throughout the surveillance footage that day, customers and employees could be seen sneaking out of the bank, including one person who fell on their way and still managed to get out. Humphrey eventually surrendered to law enforcement and got on the ground with his hands over his head while a SWAT team moved in on the bank. He was taken into custody without incident and charged with 13 separate counts of kidnapping. For over 2 years, court proceedings centered mainly around Humphrey's mental health. He was found unfit to stand trial 4 times before finally being declared competent in 2019. According to state prison records, he's now serving a 15-year sentence for 8 counts of kidnapping. He's set to be released in 2031. Number 16. Out of control cop crush. Sometime in 2018, an officer with the West Wyoming Police Department in Pennsylvania started to get an unwanted barrage of social media messages from a random civilian. It eventually became an everyday thing, reaching a point where the police chief made the young woman, who was later identified as Ashley Keister, sign an agreement specifically promising to leave the officer she was bothering alone. Police Chief Kurt Nocera told the press that the woman's crush on the man became so problematic that she was sending him over 20 messages per day. Just hours after being told to stop, she allegedly called 911 and said she was heading to the police department to look for the officer. Surveillance footage from the next morning showed a woman who looked like Keister pounding hard on the station's windows with her fists. When she failed to get inside the building without being destructive, she took an ashtray and smashed through one of the windows. Officers at the station found Keister rummaging through file cabinets. When they tried taking her into custody, she allegedly started to swing at them. A pair of officers managed to get her under control and placed her under arrest on suspicion of aggravated assault, harassment, and criminal mischief. Number 15. The disappearance of Dale Kerstetter. Usually having surveillance footage makes crimes much easier to solve. In the case of 50-year-old Dale Kerstetter from Bradford, Pennsylvania, though, it only led to more questions. Kerstetter was a creature of habit in every sense of the word. He had worked as a security guard and maintenance man at the Corning Glassworks factory for almost 30 years, when he suddenly vanished during the graveyard shift one night back in 1987. Nobody seemed to realize Dale was even missing until the first shift security guard, John Lindquist, came to take over for him in the morning. Dale's truck was found abandoned in the parking lot just a few hours later. The keys were still in the ignition, and several of Dale's personal belongings had been left behind. Police canines traced the missing man's scent back to the plant's furnace, which held expensive platinum pipes. Investigators soon started to suspect Dale had been involved in foul play. Perhaps he had co-conspired with some criminals. Along with Dale himself, $250,000 worth of the pipe had disappeared overnight. He wouldn't have normally gone near the furnace during his shift, so it was strange that the tracker dogs found his scent there. Surveillance footage from the factory's cameras showed many disturbing sights from that night. One video showed a masked man creepily lurking in the back of the plant. Dale could be seen greeting the man, leading to the immediate suspicion that he may have disappeared voluntarily while cashing in on his profits from the stolen platinum piping. But it was pretty hard to tell based on the footage whether Dale was actually under duress or not. As he led the man through the building, he stared directly at one of the security cameras. Some investigators perceived this as an unspoken cry for help, while others interpreted it as an insult, as if to say, "Watch me rob your factory." When the men walked away from the camera, Dale was never seen again. Not a single trace of him has turned up since, besides his truck and belongings that were left at the factory, and the platinum was never discovered either. At one point in the surveillance video, the masked man can be seen wheeling something large out of the plant, but there's no way of knowing if it was Dale's body or not, although some believe it was. To this day, it's unclear whether Dale was a conspirator or a victim in the theft. At the time, he had taken a significant pay cut and was in heaps of debt. But his family believes that his debts were manageable and that Dale wasn't the kind of person to solve his problems through crime. They also don't think he would have voluntarily abandoned his 6 daughters, his son, and his multiple grandchildren. In 2018, over 30 years after Dale's disappearance, his daughter Penny Kerstetter told the Olean Times-Herald that she believes someone knows something about what really happened to her dad. She also thinks her father knew the masked man from the video. She's unsure whether he was working with him or not. At the time, Penny was confident that her father was dead, but was still holding out hope that someone would finally get the truth off their chest and help bring some closure to her grieving family. Number 14. The murder of Liz Barazza. Liz and Sergio Barazza were only days away from a Florida vacation to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary back in 2019. As Sergio left for work one morning, though, Liz, who was 29 years old at the time, set up a yard sale outside the couple's Tomball, Texas home so they could make some extra money before their big trip. Surveillance footage later showed that Sergio had just driven away from the house when an unidentified individual who seemed to be wearing a disguise crept up the driveway toward Mrs. Barazza. In the video, Liz could be heard greeting the person in a friendly manner, which was followed by a brief conversation that lasted no more than 6 seconds. The mysterious figure then suddenly shot the young woman 3 times at point-blank range with a revolver, causing her to immediately collapse. As Liz lay dying on the ground, the killer stood over her and fired one last fatal shot before sprinting from the scene. The footage showed the killer driving away in a Nissan Frontier pickup truck, which was also seen driving around the neighborhood before and after the brutal murder. Police released a video to the public in hopes that someone would come forward with information, but the killer still remains at large. In an interview with local news station KHOU in early 2023, Sergio Barazza said he understands why some people might see him as the prime suspect. After all, the murder victim's spouse usually is the one to blame. But he maintains that he had nothing to do with Liz's death at all and would love to see the case solved for good. In fact, he said it scares him to know that the killer is still out there. He has also never been charged in connection to the murder. Number 13. The kidnapping of Monica Deon Barba. 29-year-old Monica Deon Barba was snatched off the street in late 2022 during a walk with her dog in Tepetitlan, Jalisco, Mexico. The incident happened on the night of November 29th, and she hasn't been seen or heard from since. Different parts of the kidnapping were caught on surveillance cameras in the area. In one clip, Monica could be seen stopping briefly on the sidewalk and then disappearing from view. Something or someone was in her way. A few moments later, 3 vehicles suspected of being used in the kidnapping drove by. The FBI identified them as a silver Volkswagen Jetta, a gray Dodge Charger, and a white Chevy Suburban. In the second video clip, multiple suspects could be seen confronting Monica beside their cars. She was forced into the silver Jetta before the convoy drove away. Monica's dog was left to run around in the street. A relative later picked up the poor pup. There are likely 5 male suspects involved, according to the FBI. They were all caught in the video except the driver of the white Suburban. After releasing the footage in 2023, FBI Special Agent in charge Robert K. Tripp said that they believe the kidnapping was targeted and that Monica is still alive and being held hostage. The captors have reportedly been in touch with her family, but details have not been released. There's a $40,000 reward being offered for information that leads to Monica's safe recovery. The FBI urged members of the public to come forward and report anything they believe might help them solve the case. Number 12. Stalker caught red-handed. 64-year-old Debbie Waring-Jones appreciated that her neighbors were willing to feed her cats and water her flowers while she took weekly trips away from her home in Birmingham, England, to Nottingham. She trusted William Nolan and his wife for years, so she was shocked in 2020 when she found listening devices attached to the underside of her coffee table and even the headboard of her bed. In an attempt to identify who put them there, she installed security cameras at her house and waited for someone to come and get the devices. Debbie made her regular trip to Nottingham to see her partner and watched from afar as the cameras captured footage of Nolan picking up the bugs. Before contacting law enforcement, Debbie tried talking to Nolan herself. He claimed he had no idea what she was talking about, so she had her adult son confront him instead. Debbie called the police, and Nolan was arrested for the outrageous breach of privacy. He ultimately pleaded guilty to 1 count of stalking without fear, alarm, or distress and received a measly 15-month jail sentence. During his sentencing, the judge described the case as one of the most serious examples of stalking he had ever seen in his career. The ordeal left Debbie feeling betrayed and scared. She knew Nolan and his wife for over 30 years and thought they were nice, normal, likable people who she could trust. After finding the listening devices, she couldn't shake the fear that her house might still be bugged. She literally lost sleep over the situation. In the aftermath of the case, she made it her mission to educate people on the dangers of stalking. The main lesson she wants to pass along is simply to not trust anyone, even those closest to you. Number 11. The murder of Stephanie Anderson Powell. Just like any other morning one day in 2008, 39-year-old mother of 3 Stephanie Anderson Powell went to work at a Trade Wilco convenience store in Raleigh, North Carolina to work the opening shift. As she approached the front door, a masked robber suddenly rushed up behind her and forced her inside the store at gunpoint. Security cameras caught almost the entire robbery, including Stephanie's pleas to the gunman to spare her life. He repeatedly demanded that Stephanie open the safe, and she tried but couldn't get it to open up. As she desperately scrambled with the lock, she could be heard saying, "Please, Jesus," and begging the thief for her life. The suspect then shot Stephanie, causing her to instantly collapse onto the floor. She could be heard screaming as the robber once again demanded she open the safe. By then, she was too weak to even try. Stephanie's arm could be seen moving in the video, as if in a desperate attempt to reach a cell phone. After grabbing the key to the safe and trying to get it open, the shooter calmly left the store like it was a normal day. Every morning, Stephanie's fiancé, Fred Russell Hewitt, stopped by the store to pick up a newspaper and talk with her. He showed up as usual that day, except this time he found Stephanie lying dead in a pool of blood behind the counter. Heartbreaking security footage captured Hewitt in a hysterical state as he tried to make sense of what he saw and pleaded with 911 operators to quickly get an ambulance to the store. Investigators tied the deadly crime to several recent robberies in the area, but they didn't know who the culprit was. They eventually got hold of a video with a clear view of the killer's face and shared it with the public. A woman identified the suspect as her ex-boyfriend, Armand De Vega, a repeat offender with a long history of burglaries. He was charged with murder and armed robbery in connection to the fatal crime spree. De Vega was convicted of Stephanie's murder as well as 6 counts of robbery. He was sentenced to a life term without parole. Number 10. The abduction of Megan Holden. While living in Tyler, Texas during the early 2000s, 19-year-old Megan Leanne Holden got a part-time job at her local Walmart. Shortly before midnight on January 19, 2005, she clocked out and left the store but never got back home. Megan's remains were found only a few days later in a ditch 380 miles from her workplace. Someone had shot her in the head and left her body like garbage along the side of a road. Chilling surveillance footage of the abduction showed a man in a long black coat rushing up on Megan from behind as she got into her car. The attacker, later identified as a 24-year-old former Marine named Johnny Lee Williams, was seen forcing the woman into the vehicle before getting in himself and driving off. According to witnesses and other evidence, the suspect waited in the parking lot for several hours that night and could even be seen walking after multiple potential victims, as if he was going to kidnap them, before quickly changing his mind. After killing Megan, Williams went on an interstate crime spree while in her car, which included robbing a convenience store and trying to hold up an entire trailer park. The park security had guns and stopped the situation as it happened, causing Williams to flee the scene. Authorities finally caught up with him after he went to a local emergency room to get care for a non-life-threatening gunshot wound. He was promptly sent back to Texas to face charges for Megan's murder. Williams was the only source of information about the circumstances and motives surrounding the abduction, so when attorneys started discussing potential plea deals, the prosecution made it a priority to negotiate an agreement that would involve a detailed confession. In exchange for having the death penalty taken off the table, Williams spent 5 hours going over what he did with Megan's family and law enforcement. According to him, he drove the terrified teenager to his trailer where he proceeded to assault her and get high. They were at the trailer for about 3 hours before Williams forced Megan back into her vehicle and drove to a hotel in Odessa, where he rented out a room and took advantage of her again. Scared for her life, Megan obeyed her kidnapper's demands. After holding her captive at the hotel for over 8 hours, Williams told Megan that he was going to drive her back to Tyler. She seemed relieved at the time, but became concerned once again during the drive when Williams started going in the opposite direction. In an apparent last-ditch attempt to escape, Megan hit him in the face, but Williams was much larger than her. Megan was rather tiny, and she unfortunately couldn't get away. Williams lost his temper after that and choked Megan until she went limp. He then dragged her out of the car and into a ditch, where she was later found. After shooting her in the head a few times, he left her there. Like a true sociopath, the most compelling thing on his mind was the fact that he was hungry, even though he had just committed such a horrific crime. To satisfy his needs, William drove to a restaurant and ordered a cheeseburger. The prosecutor wanted to seek the death penalty, but it was extremely important to Megan's family to get what details they could about her last few hours on Earth, so the state respected their wishes. Thankfully, Williams will never see freedom beyond bars again. It must have been so difficult for Megan's family to come face to face with her killer and listen as he told them all of the awful things he did to Megan. Number 9. Getting rid of the evidence. Everything seemed fine when 44-year-old Casey Young talked to her family during her drive home from work in May 2015. But nobody ever heard from her after that, and when she didn't show up to her job at a Charleston, South Carolina hospital the next day, her colleagues began to seriously worry about her safety. A missing persons report was quickly filed, and detectives then began to put together the case piece by piece. Phone records revealed that Casey's phone died early the night she vanished, shortly after she got home from work, and had been turned off ever since. Her live-in boyfriend, Daron Collins, told investigators that Casey left during a fight and never came back. Law enforcement soon found out that this was a lie after getting a tip leading them to the location of Casey's car. It was parked outside an apartment building about 3 miles away from the couple's home. Surveillance footage seemed to show Collins leaving the car from the driver's side. He then was seen wiping the car down while wearing gloves and throwing out the cleaning supplies in a nearby dumpster. At the same time, Collins' phone was at the home he and Young shared, leading cops to suspect that he left it there on purpose in order to cover his tracks. A review of the home surveillance system at the house showed that the cameras were unplugged at certain times the day Casey disappeared, and that footage had been deleted. For now, Collins faces charges of obstruction of justice and grand larceny, and he remains a key person of interest in Casey's disappearance. The judge set his bond at $9,000 and is requiring Collins to wear an ankle monitoring bracelet if he ever manages to bond out. The investigation into Casey Young's disappearance is still ongoing, with a reward of up to $10,000 being offered for information leading to the missing woman's location and/or the people responsible. Number 8. The murder of Germaine Dixon. After serving about 20 years in the federal penitentiary for drug and murder charges, former patio crew gang member victim Germaine Dixon re-entered society in 2020 as a completely new man. He had given up the gang lifestyle entirely and was determined to stay on the straight and narrow path. Less than a year later, though, the 47-year-old was shot in the back of the head in broad daylight and killed while walking to his car in Queens. Surveillance footage caught an African-American man disguised in Hasidic Jewish garb rushing up behind Rita. He then executed the victim in cold blood before speeding off in a car. According to witnesses, the suspect waited in the area for hours leading up to the murder, pretending to work on his car. In 2023, after reviewing surveillance footage and tracing the suspect's movements, police arrested 53-year-old Ron Reeder from Teaneck, New Jersey. Authorities believe the shooting stemmed from the narcotics trade and/or because the victim often carried large amounts of money. On the day he was killed, Dixon had $10,000 in cash on him, but the shooter fled the scene without taking any money. Reeder served 3 years in state prison during the late 1980s for robbery and weapon charges. A few years later, he got a 21-year sentence for manslaughter and weapon charges. He was paroled back in 2012 and now faces charges of second-degree murder and a weapons count. If convicted on the murder charge, Reeder could face life in prison. Number 7. Stalker strikes again. On Christmas Eve 2016, a young woman from Union County, North Carolina, named Maddie Mulstaff, was terrified when her doorbell camera revealed that one of her high school classmates, Logan Orsini, was outside waiting on her porch. He asked if he could speak with Maddie, but she was too creeped out to entertain the man. The two teens weren't even friends. In fact, they barely knew each other at all, so Logan had no reason whatsoever to be at her house. The next morning, Maddie woke up and found a bizarre shrine dedicated to her on the front porch. There were also several religious items, including a Bible opened up to the story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, sandals, a bottle of wine, and an alabaster jar, which Mary used in a biblical story to pour oils on Jesus' feet. This was just the first of what would become many unwelcome surprise visits. On one occasion, Logan hung out on Maddie's porch for hours in the middle of the night. He paced back and forth and talked to himself as he did so. Over the years, he's been charged with stalking countless times for repeatedly contacting Maddie. He was warned to leave her alone, but it apparently didn't sink in. The judge overseeing the case spared Logan of any prison time for the first 3 stalking charges and sentenced him to only 5 years of probation. He warned the man that if he violated his probation, he would most likely get locked up for a long time. As you've probably already guessed, Logan violated the order. He was taken back into custody in 2018, but was freed after posting a $30,000 bond. In 2019, sheriff's deputies arrested him for standing across the street from the Mulstaff family's home. He also caught another stalking charge for harassing Maddie's boyfriend. This time he was held on a $130,000 bond. The young woman later told Inside Edition that she had gotten used to never feeling safe, since her stalker had practically managed to avoid jail entirely. She began speaking out to lawmakers about the need for heightened protection for the victims of stalking. With the system currently in place, Maddie has to renew her order of protection against Logan every year, which also means being forced to face her stalker in court each time. She has called for legal changes that would allow restraining orders to be valid for longer periods than 1 year at a time. Speaking with Fox 46, Maddie's dad described Logan as having a God complex. He said that all the family wanted was for him to leave his daughter alone. They didn't and still don't understand the man's obsession with her, and they wished he would get serious mental help. Number 6. The murder of Missyvers. Early one morning in 2016, 45-year-old fitness instructor and mother of 3, Terry Missyvers, went to her church in Midlothian, Texas to set up for an exercise class she was supposed to teach. When her students came in about an hour later, around 5 a.m., they found Missy lifeless on the floor. She had been viciously attacked, leaving her with a major head injury and multiple puncture wounds in the chest. First responders tried their best to save the woman, but she succumbed to her injuries. While checking the building's surveillance cameras, police found footage of a masked person wandering around in riot gear and a vest that said police on it. The individual could be seen pushing doors open, as if they were searching for someone. Almost everything about the murder is still a mystery to this day. Nothing seemed to be stolen from either the church or from Missy, ruling out the likelihood of a robbery gone wrong. And while the shooting seemed specifically targeted, Missy was a well-liked person with no enemies that anyone could think of. Her friends and family also failed to come up with a possible reason someone might want her dead. Just days before she was killed, she showed a friend some creepy messages she got from a man on LinkedIn, and in the months leading up to the shooting, she had exchanged flirtatious messages on the same website with another person. Naturally, investigators also initially looked at Missy's husband, Brandon, as a potential suspect. He claimed that their marriage was going great, but it sure didn't look that way to detectives after seeing the couple's financial records and talking to people who knew them. In fact, it seemed like Brandon and Missy were heading toward a divorce thanks to infidelity and fighting. Brandon has denied any involvement in Missy's death since her passing and has never been charged in connection to the case. While many people seem to have made their mind up about him playing some kind of role in the murder, that's not the case as far as anyone knows, and he's presumed innocent under the law. Authorities are unsure of the killer's gender and have only narrowed the suspect's height down to somewhere between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 foot 8. The person walked with a distinctive limp, which so far has only been useful for ruling people out. As the case sits at a standstill, even after receiving help from the FBI, authorities remain hopeful that someone will come forward with information that will help solve the case and ensure that justice is served once and for all. Number 5. Disappearance of Tiffany Witten. It was no secret that 26-year-old Tiffany Witten was not a model citizen. Addicted to both heroin and meth, she had a nasty habit of stealing to support her addictions because she struggled to hold long-term employment. In August 2013, a surveillance camera captured footage of her stealing from an IHOP in Georgia that she worked at. Between stealing and showing up to her shifts high, she was unable to keep up with the job and was eventually fired. A little over a month later, Tiffany was seen acting strange during a late-night, early-morning trip to a Walmart in Marietta, Georgia. After seeing her shoplift, security guards tried to confront her and search through her purse. Tiffany then dropped her bag and phone, kicked her shoes off, and ran from the store on foot, even though the guards never chased after her. She was never seen or heard from again. Tiffany's boyfriend, Ashley Cordell, was with her that night. The couple had taken some drugs and they had a small fight at the store. When Tiffany fled from the store, Cordell didn't immediately follow her out. About an hour after she ran away, he showed up at the IHOP she had gotten fired from and asked if anyone had seen her there. Cordell failed to tell the young woman's family that she had vanished into thin air at 2 o'clock in the morning, and because Tiffany had a habit of disappearing for days at a time, her family didn't immediately suspect that she might be in a dangerous situation. But they eventually started to worry and got the police involved. During questioning, Cordell's version of events seemed confusing and conflicting, but he consistently stood by one thing: he didn't have anything to do with Tiffany's disappearance. Without any evidence of Tiffany's whereabouts or fate, it's impossible to say what happened to her or who, if anyone, is even responsible for it. Number 4. The murder of Tushar Atre. 50-year-old tech entrepreneur, marijuana executive Tushar Atre lived in a multi-million-dollar seaside home in Santa Cruz, California. But what seemed to many like a dream quickly turned into a nightmare in October 2019, when he was kidnapped and murdered near his house. A neighbor's surveillance camera captured footage of 3 people walking toward Atre's house shortly before 3 o'clock in the morning. Several of Atre's live-in employees overheard the criminals entering the house and talking about some kind of safe. They could also hear Atre's voice as the men captured him. The suspects were most likely referring to a safe in Atre's bedroom, which held about $80,000 cash in it. The intruders left without getting it open, and the employees quickly called the police. There were no signs of forced entry, and the home had not been ransacked at all. But Atre was still missing, along with a BMW belonging to his girlfriend, who was out of town at the time, and there was a large amount of blood in the street. Security footage later showed Atre trying to run from his house with his hands tied up behind him while being chased and tackled by the suspects. At least one of the men was carrying an assault rifle. The kidnappers then forced Atre into the BMW and drove off. Several hours later, police found a vehicle abandoned near Atre's cannabis farm in the mountains. There was blood on both the interior and exterior. About 60 feet from the SUV, investigators found Atre's dead body. He was face down and handcuffed with zip ties behind his back. He had multiple stab wounds and a gunshot wound. Months went by without any major leads. This quickly soon turned to years. In one sense, there were plenty of suspects based on the fact that Atre had so much money. At the same time, everyone the investigators looked at kept getting ruled out as suspects. But detectives continued working on the case, and in 2023 they finally arrested 4 people: Stephen Lindsay, Joshua Camps, Curtis Charters, and Caleb Charters. Stephen Lindsay and Caleb Charters were former employees of Atre's who had only worked for him for a short time. They were allegedly unhappy over a money-related matter and felt that Atre owed them. They also felt emasculated after being ordered to do push-ups in front of fellow employees. All 4 men have pleaded not guilty to murder, kidnapping, and robbery. The case is still being carried out through court. Number 3. The disappearance of Steven Coty. A Florida attorney named Steven Coty told his colleagues he was going to the bathroom one day back in 2023. Instead, he vanished from the law practice in Largo, Florida, and never came back, leaving his keys, wallet, and phone on his desk and a partially written email on his computer. Concerned for his safety, his best friend and managing partner, Jake Blanchard, filed a missing persons report as soon as he could. The bathroom of the building was smeared with blood and smelled strongly of bleach, as if someone had tried to clean up evidence. Surveillance footage showed a Toyota Tundra pulling into the parking lot that morning around 8:30 a.m. or so. A man identified by authorities as a plastic surgeon named Dr. Tomasz Kozłowski could then be seen getting out of the vehicle and carrying a large box into the building. He was wearing gloves and had a backpack with him. Almost 2 hours later, after Coty took his bathroom break, the man thought to be Kozłowski left the building wearing a different outfit than the one he went inside with. He was pulling a cart with a covering hiding its contents and was visibly struggling with what seemed like dead human weight. A search of Kozłowski's vehicles turned up a ballistic vest covered in blood, a taser, brass knuckles, duct tape, masks, IV needles, and even sedatives. Based on the amount of blood found, along with the fact that Coty was never seen physically leaving the building, investigators believe Kozłowski killed him and wheeled his body out. He's currently in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder. It's rare for prosecutors to pursue a murder case without a body being found, especially so early on in an investigation. Kozłowski's lawyer urged the public to remember that every defendant is presumed innocent until found guilty. According to NBC Miami, the law firm Coty worked for was representing Kozłowski's former boss and co-workers in a lawsuit filed by Kozłowski. He accused the company and its staff of improperly billing his patients while he worked there and claimed that the mismanagement damaged his reputation and career potential. Authorities have declined to speculate about a possible motive for the time being. Number 2. The murder of Mary Lou Sarkisian. The relationship between 50-year-old mother of 3 Mary Lou Sarkisian and her on- and off-boyfriend of 5 years, Jason Besher, became more toxic every time they fought to try making things work. In 2016, Mary Lou finally decided to cut things off for good. By then, the relationship had taken a violent turn, and she was genuinely afraid of her former lover. She decided to get a 5-year restraining order against Besher, but it failed to keep her ex-boyfriend away. Besher was convinced that Mary Lou was holding out some of the profits from his illegal marijuana growing operation. One day he showed up at her home and allegedly tried to choke her with a towel. As she made it clear to him that their relationship was over, he only seemed more intent on refusing to accept the reality of their situation. He went from begging for Mary Lou back to aggressively harassing her into accepting him. After finally disentangling herself from Besher, Mary Lou blocked him and had security cameras installed at her home in Huntington Beach, California. The next day, her family became worried since they hadn't heard from her in a while. Meanwhile, Besher confided in a relative about a horrific act he committed the night before. At the family member's request, he turned himself in to the police. Mary Lou was discovered dead on her floor in a pool of blood. Based on the evidence at the scene, investigators concluded that Besher tried to break in with a crowbar. When it didn't work, he waited outside her sliding glass bedroom door, knowing she would let her dog outside at some point. He then slipped inside at the first opportunity and violently beat and strangled the victim. While reviewing the footage from Mary Lou's security system, detectives heard Besher sarcastically saying, "New security system, how did that effing work out for you?" He was soon charged with murder. During his trial, the court heard about how Mary Lou had indeed somehow spent a lot more money than she made on paper. It will never be known whether or not she stole it from Besher's marijuana operation or if they had an agreement as business partners. But it doesn't matter because either way, it wouldn't have justified her murder. Besher's defense team argued that he didn't mean to kill Mary Lou and that he wouldn't have turned himself in if he actually had. All he meant to do that night was collect money that Mary Lou owed him, but he lost control. They also mentioned a few things from his childhood that they claimed affected his behavior as an adult. Consequently, the defense urged the court to sentence the defendant to the lesser charge of second-degree murder or manslaughter. Prosecutors accused Besher of lying in wait, though, and deliberately killing Mary Lou in a premeditated crime. The jury decided to convict him of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of lying in wait, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 1. Creepy Canadian Air Force Colonel. As a high-ranking officer for the Canadian Air Force, Russell Williams was a shining pillar of his community. He was highly educated, had a top security clearance, and at one point was responsible for transporting British royalty during their visits to Canada. In 2008, Williams started to act on some of his most intimate desires. But instead of doing it legally, he began breaking into random houses to fulfill his disturbing fetish for women's underwear. Nobody in the small Ontario town where he lived knew who the mysterious thief was, but it happened often enough for people to get used to having their entire collection of undergarments disappear. During his break-ins, Williams sometimes stuck around long enough to try things on and take pictures of himself wearing the stolen items with his camera. He also did this at home, where he kept his growing collection catalogued. On at least 2 different occasions, he burned the garments in his possession because he was accumulating way too many to successfully hide them from his wife. Williams escalated his disturbing behavior back in 2009 when he violently assaulted 2 women inside their homes. A few months later, he killed fellow Air Force members, Corporal Marie-France Comeau. In 2010, Williams killed a 27-year-old single mom named Jessica Lloyd. Unable to find her body, law enforcement officials classified her as a missing person while they tried to explain the alarming increase in violent crime in their area. Until then, nobody had even thought to suspect Williams of being responsible for the crimes. In fact, another neighbor had actually fallen under suspicion, and although he was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing, his reputation took a huge hit. Investigators finally tied the crimes to Williams through some tire treads that were left behind at the scene of Jessica Lloyd's murder. The pattern of treads was from a highly unusual make of tire, and it matched up perfectly with Williams' Pathfinder. He was summoned to the police station for questioning and started confessing later that day after being presented with the tire tread evidence. He also began to open up after realizing there was no talking his way out of the problems he had created for himself. By owning up to his actions, the disgraced former commander believed it would make the situation easier on his wife, who reportedly knew nothing at all of his many crimes. While giving his confession, he admitted that he took Lloyd's life because she had seen his face and knew he was the one who was breaking into homes. He revealed the location of her body and told investigators where they could find more evidence at his house. While searching through his electronic devices, detectives came across thousands of photos of Williams wearing stolen undergarments. He was hit with too many criminal charges to list here. He went from being one of the Canadian military's most respected leaders ever to its biggest disgrace literally overnight. The case received worldwide coverage and outrage. The man pleaded guilty to nearly 90 counts, including Lloyd's murder, Comeau's murder, breaking and entering, forcible confinement, breaking and entering, assault, and much more. He received 2 life sentences, an 82-year sentence, and 4 10-year sentences which are running concurrently. While he could technically be paroled after serving just 25 years, a prosecutor said it will be very difficult considering the brutal nature of his crimes. The Canadian Air Force made a statement of disapproval by burning Williams' uniform, cutting up his medals, and crushing his vehicle when a verdict was reached. Would you rather lose a finger to a shark bite or have a bear cause tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage to your home? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.